Hello, my name is Jacek Bartosiak. Welcome to Strategy&Future. Today our guest is Ridvan. Ridvan will introduce himself even more, given the very interesting background that he has. Hello, Ridvan.
Hi.
So, it was always difficult for me to remember all your background as a Crimean Tatar. Could you introduce yourself with a full long name and everything that is related to it?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Ridvan Bari de Urcosta. I born in the Soviet Union times in Georgia, in Abkhazia, in Sukhumi, and I was living till 5 in Sukhumi. And almost when the civil war started in Abkhazia, we left Georgia. And moved to Crimea because originally I'm Crimean Tatar and I belong to indigenous people of Crimea. So for us it was priority. But unfortunately our our move to our homeland coincided with tragic events in Abkhazia. So and since 1991 I was living in Crimea. I finished university. I was working in Sevastopol state administration in a very specific department, in investment department, where I was doing very specific tasks related to analytical research about investment companies in Crimea and Sevastopol. But in 2014, annexation happened, and actually my background, so according to my academic background, I belong to international relations community, but I finished, let's say, 3 years before annexation, and annexation actually returned me again to academic life. So I witnessed all these events that happened during the annexation and
in Sevastopol, you were?
Yes, exactly, in Sevastopol. So, and I grew up around all this, let's say, symbolical, philosophical, sometimes mythological narrative of Russia, particularly in Sevastopol, around all these military warships. I was young boy, was running and watching on how great these ships, so it's like a part of my background. So after annexation, I returned, as I said, to academical life. Now I'm a PhD researcher in University of Warsaw, and writing analytical articles for different European and American think tanks, like European Council for Foreign Relations, Jamestown Foundations, and many others, sometimes cooperating with Naval Institute of United States.
I met Ridvan first time because he was dealing with the geopolitics of Turkey and the Black Sea region, and that's how we met and that's how we discussed, talking about Dugin and Mackinder and how Turks are viewing it. And this is how our relationship and friendship got started a few years ago. But coming back to the Crimea, it might be interesting for those who will view us how it unfolded, the annexation of Crimea, Sevastopol. What did it look like on the ground?
Actually, in many cases, sometimes we fully concentrating on Crimea. I mean, Crimea as an autonomic region, but from the very beginning, all events started from Sevastopol, actually. All this basic element of Russianness, was not in Crimea, it was exactly in Sevastopol. And first signs that annexation is going to happen were in Sevastopol, I mean political. Second, in terms of military aspects, even the first, let's say, forces that Russia used in order to start annexation were used located in Sevastopol military forces. So without Sevastopol, it would be impossible actually. So after maybe several days, Russia slowly, gradually was delivering additional military forces to Crimea. But initially, from the onset, it was Russia was using military forces from Sevastopol. But annexation was looked like some kind of surrealistic event, really surrealistic event with elements of theater, really, so with element of theater actions, and at the same time it was looking like everything is under control. So everything was happening so smoothly, and I don't know, it was because of some kind of great plan that created Putin, or it was because of the zero resistance, let's say, like that, local population, full acceptance, at least majority, yes. So it was really interesting event with the military aspect was on the background, not on the surface. On the surface was happening like a theater, but of course it was visible if you would open eyes. You would see that everywhere present are militaries, everywhere, in every particular strategic point, in every particular choke point, let's say, in the cities, in
crossroads,
yes,
roundabouts,
yes, exactly,
entries,
yes,
exits, bridges, yes,
yes,
important buildings, telecommunication points, yeah.
Yes, and during all this first week before the referendum, I was working with Canadian journalists, and I was witnessing how it's happening. Actually, I was visiting all these hot spots. Let's like in Sevastopol, in Dunuslav, it's western part of Crimean Peninsula, in Simferopol. So it was really, as I said, it looked like as a quite well-developed plan, but at the same time we could criticize this because the local population, they didn't resist. So that's why it was look like that Russia has Russia prepared some agenda before starting annexation.
And what does Crimea, what does Sevastopol look like basically? It's the flat land, hilly, with with lime escarpments. What does it look like?
So I would say that like a Sevastopol, just the beginning of between steppe and so it's three geographical elements present in Sevastopol, and particularly, so let's say three. So it's mountains from let's say from the south of Sevastopol, it's mountains. On the north, it's steppe, and inside this city, huge bay, Sevastopol Bay, huge. It's even antique. Actually, it's one of the oldest cities in Crimea. It's created by ancient Greeks because they find out that it's excellent bay in strategic points and just for living. So, and after that, Sevastopol, that's why, because it became Russian main strategic city in the Black Sea. So it wasn't like a creation of Catherine II. It was creation of
ancient Greeks,
ancient Greeks.
And geography, topography.
Yes, yes, but Simferopol is completely different. So Simferopol is located in a flat area, in steppe. So, but at the same time, we could say that like it is some kind of gateway to Crimean mountains. So it's it's specifically located in the center of the peninsula.
And other places like Yalta and Theodosia.
Yes, but they don't play such important role. But they, in recreational terms, in touristic terms, yes, they are. This is very maybe if people coming for Crimea, they're not coming for let's say for Sevastopol or for Simferopol. They're coming exactly for those cities that you mentioned because of the touristic and recreational interest.
So, moving to geopolitics, what do you think? I mean, could you explain to our viewers what is the meaning of the Crimea to Russia?
So it's elements of, I would say it's elements of three main components: military, political, and symbolical, let's say even religious. So if Peter the Great was making the window to Europe by creating St. Petersburg, actually the window to Europe or to external world, to even right now we could say it's window to European world, yes, for instance during the Kiev and Rus times. It was exactly the Crimea, it was exactly southern direction, because in the west, Kiev, in the western direction, Kiev and Rus didn't have such direct access to Europe, but Byzantium Empire was nearby through the Crimea. Actually, Byzantium Empire was controlling territories of mountain Crimea. So mountains was under full control of the Byzantium Empire. So from Feodosia till Sevastopol, it was under control of Byzantium. So, and together with Khersones, now we're calling it Sevastopol. So, and all this, let's say, intellectual heritage of Russia, intellectual of heritage of Kiev and Rus, we could say like that, intellectual heritage of Kiev and Rus, and other Russia is claiming itself part of the Kiev and Rus discourse narrative, so Crimea is a crucial element. Crimea is a crucial, historically speaking, intellectually speaking, and religiously. Another aspect is strategic, because after disappearance from the European political map, Kiev and Rus, Muscovite state was very small and quite outside of this area. And but at the same time, after Mongol-Tatar invasion, let's say from Moldova till far east was created a different state of nomadic people. And finally the most powerful was Crimean Khanate, actually. Again, coincidence? I don't know, but it's very interesting moment that exactly in Crimea was created the most powerful Khanate within system of Golden Horde. So, and for Russia, the biggest problem was, so they invaded Kazan Khanate, they invaded Astrakhan Khanate, but their plans to expand into south, they found out that it's impossible without invading Crimean Khanate or destroying Crimean Khanate. So this was almost for end of the 18th century the main strategic idea of Russia, to destroy Crimean Khanate. So it wasn't about just to take a Crimea. The first idea was destroying the most strategically important state in Eastern Europe. Because I would say even in Eastern Europe, in particular period, was existing the balance of power. For instance, we know that in Europe, in Western Europe, was existed, yes, after this Westphalian conference, was existing balance of power between different states. But in Eastern Europe, sometimes nobody mentioning, but it was existing in short period, maybe 1 century, but Crimean Khanate, Polish state, Rzeczpospolita, and Muscovy state. So,
yeah,
and all this zone, between them, it was like a rivalry area. And Crimea, and they balanced each other against, sometimes Poland together with Crimeans against Moscow, Moscow together with Crimeans against Poland. So even Polish people together with Russians against Crimean Khanate. So we could find different evidences about this. But what is most interesting is that the Polish people and Crimeans, they didn't manage to deter Russia, Moscow. They didn't manage. And finally, Russia reached the borders of the Crimean Khanate. And when they reached the borders, direct borders of Crimean Khanate, they only after they find out that we need to to think what to do with this Crimean peninsula. So they find out that we need access to the Kerch Strait. We need to access to
From Azov, yeah?
Yes. So the beginning of Russian invasion, or let's say increasing presence or projection of power to the Crimea, was not directly from Crimea. It was from the Sea of Azov. So the first Russian fleet that was made, it's Azov flotilla, was created. So, and all this small ship was fighting against Turkish fleets, because in the Kerch Straits were present Turkish naval bases. So only when they reached the border with Crimean Khanate, they started to think that it's crucial. So first it was access to Sea of Azov, access to Kerch Straits. Finally, slowly they reached and annexed Crimea. And during the Kuchuk-Kainerjir agreement in 1774, first time it was agreement between Ottoman Empire and Moscow. The first time was outlining that Russia has a interest in regarding the Black Sea.
Coming back to the modern times.
Yes.
What is the importance for the Crimea for Russia now?
Almost same. So, but at the same time, of course, additional moments, because so this strategic point of Crimea, it allows to control and project power not only to the Black Sea, but beyond Eastern Mediterranean. It's absolutely. So it was since this period that I mentioned, the Russian projection of power to Eastern Mediterranean region started actually right after that. And now the strategic aspect of Crimea, it's additional. We could say that like it has additional elements, like if we take in account that now we exist independent Ukraine, so Crimea could be used to attack in Ukrainian underbelly, to attack to, let's say, to this zone, the most vulnerable zone of Ukraine, from Odessa to Kharkov. So this is or for instance could be used in order to attack from Crimea and Donbass and reach and connect these two regions. So this is really crucial element. Or even, for instance, if we imagine the situation that, for instance, the war could start between Russia and some countries from the Black Sea. So now Crimea fully equipped, almost fully equipped. It's just a couple years left in order to finish this modernization of Crimea and like a creation, really some kind of fortress from Crimea. So without passing Crimea, you could not reach the Russian mainland. You could not. So Crimea making very strategic place. So it's like a blocking any further attack in the Russian mainland.
Yeah, and putting aside the military aspect, in terms of the economic life of Russia, Russian underbelly, agriculture, baseland and hinterland is right behind the Crimea and the Volga river system and Don river system.
Yes. So if you would like to understand what does it mean for Russia, this region, and particularly Azov Sea, we need just go to the internet and check the online maritime movement of ships. You will see it's huge. But the tricky issue is that before annexation of Crimea, it was really very difficult to Russia to benefit from this region, because Ukraine was controlling the main choke point. It's Kerch Strait, because yes, it's important, but because of the Ukraine, they had to pay. They had to pay to Ukraine, but now they fully control this and can develop can develop this region. And for instance, from Azov Sea, it's possible to reach by river system almost to Moscow or even Kazan. So it's very developed Caspian Sea.
For strategic flows, for transportation.
Yes,
Economic lifeline. Okay, what does the mean of the Crimea mean for Ukraine in terms of economy, strategic, posture?
First of all, it's political and symbolical because so they could not give up the idea that it's Crimea part of Ukraine. So if they would give up, so it means directly that for us that we are lost. We are lost this war with Russia. But at the same time, Ukraine is claiming that it's part of Crimea is part of the Ukrainian territory because actually historically we could find many evidences as already for centuries. Sometimes Ukrainians considered Crimea as a part of own habitat, as a part of, even if in Crimea were living Crimean Tatars. So this is the crucial element that Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians had long history of connections, long history of, I would not say cohesion, but at the same time it's really deeply interrooted relations. And they increased during 25 years under Ukrainian control over Crimea, between Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians, these connections increased. And at the same time, so it's two main elements. If you discuss even with Ukrainians why they need Crimea, so because of the international law, because it's our sovereignty, and second is because in Crimea we have indigenous people. So, and these indigenous people, the Crimean Tatars, they calling themselves as a part of Ukraine. So they claiming to be part of Ukraine, to be part of, let's say, European, like a family.
The last question. What will happen to the Crimean issue over the next 20 years? What do you think? What is your assessment?
Recently, not so much recently, but was adopted the Crimean Declaration in the United States, almost same to those Baltic states that was at the beginning of the Cold War. So many said that it's really going to commit United States that they're going to never accept that Crimean annexation. Maybe it is true, but unfortunately I see that in this Crimean Declaration that adopted in the United States, two main weaknesses. First weakness is that it was done because of the political struggle. It wasn't because of some kind of full commitment of all different political forces in the United States. It was just you need we have some demands from some political groups. So okay, in order to seize this in order to seize these critics, it's better to adopt this kind of. So it was not well thought declaration. And second, that none mention about Crimean Tatars.
Okay, but
this thing. So that's
just
why
to make
I'm saying.
Long story short, what would be the end result in 20 years? Will Crimea be back with Ukraine?
So it fully depends because of I know personally, and of course I'm following on the situation in Crimea. The military solution doesn't exist right now. So I mean, like the local people, they really ready to fight. I mean, the majority of Russian people, they're ready to fight, and plus all this militarization of Crimea. So that's why more likely it would be depend what is going to happen in Moscow, how the political situation going to evolve in Moscow, whether it's going to corrupt this political regime, Putin political regime, and finally some different people could reanimate the concept of returning Crimea to Ukraine. But otherwise, it was like right after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Like it wasn't only state collapsed, people collapsed, and the military didn't react. Nobody didn't react. That's why Crimea was slowly put to like a transformed to Ukraine. So that's why, in my personal opinion, in 20 years, if nothing is going to happen with political, more, let's say, democratization in Russia, so Crimea is going to be be under occupation.
Ridvan, thank you very much. Stay tuned to Strategy and Future. Thank you.